Lofton, the crew, he's a prodigy. Truth with no apology, no apostasy. Love philosophy, apostasy described cause it's house and free. Debate, radical views from the Council of Jerusalem, the Vatican II. You only got one rule, doing sabbatical for true. Dialogue with individuals, they interview a crew. Christ the King for the whole earth, reigns supreme, sole purpose of my whole verse. Yo, check what I raise beyond. Thankful for our viewers and our Patreons.
Ain't no stopping me, I stay on philosophy. I gotta be a real life prodigy. Prophecy predicted the Messiah. We spit fire while y'all sinning then get higher. Like Mariah, but we keeping it clean now. See now, R&T stay on the scene now. We vow our whole life to Christ. We infuse with grace and insight on life. But I'll stop it there. R&T live.
You're watching Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussion, debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Welcome to the show, everybody. Your host, Michael Lofton. With a quick one here for the patrons. Doing it live, but then it will be made available only for the patrons as usual. This is going to be 3 witnesses to the divine institution of the papacy. We've been talking a little bit about that, and we've done a lot of videos on it, but I think it's maybe good to go over these 3 particular witnesses. I've talked a little bit about Philip before, Philip the legate at Ephesus, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and then Leo, his 33rd letter, Pope Leo. And then after that, Agatho's letter to the emperor read at the 6th Ecumenical Council. I think that these will be very good witnesses to go over, although not the only ones that are available. Quite a few more. But I think they're definitely interesting ones. Somebody says, surprise stream by Michael. Yeah. Wanted to do something for the patrons, so here we go. We'll probably have another one later on. Trying to think here what we're going to do later tonight. I don't know. We'll figure it out, but I imagine we'll have something else. Okay. So Hugh says, I'm looking forward to the triggering in the comment section after this video. Yeah. Although, again, it'll be just for patrons. But, yeah, people get pretty triggered when it comes to this discussion, don't they? Well, we had a show recently where I reviewed 2 priests from Ancient Faith Radio who were reviewing my video on Pints with Aquinas. And, by the way, thank you, Joko, for the super chat there. And so I was interacting with it, and I was talking a little bit about the divine institution of the papacy, or its divine origin, and saying that effectively, if that is true, right, if the papal claims are true, then we don't really have any other options other than to be Catholic. If the claims are not true, then don't waste your time being a Catholic, is my 2 cents. So, but we didn't get a chance to talk a whole lot about the divine institution of the papacy during that video. I just kind of took it for granted. So here we'll go over some things. So someone says, do one tonight. I'll have a super chat question for you later. Sounds good. Yeah, I'll definitely do something, around 6 o'clock or so. Not sure what yet. We'll see. Okay. So let me share my screen here. That way y'all can see what I'm reading. Pull it up. And we'll probably do a comedy hour. I kind of feel like doing another. Although I don't want to burn y'all out with too much comedy hours and not enough theology. I want to give y'all substance and content as well. But I really, personally, I really also enjoy the comedy hours. But I don't know if people are enjoying them enough or if they're getting burnt out on them. So we'll see. I can also give a lecture maybe tonight. We'll see. Okay. So again, we're talking here about Philip the Presbyter. He's a papal legate at the Council of Ephesus. For those of y'all, not familiar, the Council of Ephesus is the third ecumenical council. It was sparked, of course, because this is why I said theology is greater than comedy, right? The council was sparked because of Nestorius, Patriarch of Constantinople, and some of the things that he was saying about the mother. Well, he didn't necessarily want to accept the term mother of God. So some of the things that he was saying about the Virgin Mary sounded very heretical. And of course, Cyril of Alexandria responds to him, and they have some back and forth going on. And in fact, I'm going to do a show reviewing their letters, or their exchanges, at least Cyril's letters to Nestorius, and then maybe a few others. And so he's dealing with this heresy that he's seeing with Nestorius, and it's causing all kinds of issues. And the Pope basically gives him 10 days to repent. That is Nestorius. But at the same time, right around the same time, the emperor convokes a council to deal with the matter. So the Pope at the time, Pope Celestine, just basically says, okay. Yeah, I'm quite certain it was Celestine at the time. Yeah, it was Celestine who gave him 10 days. The Pope just goes ahead and says, okay, that's fine. So we're going to have a council now. Although, of course, the Pope isn't present. He sends a legate, and one of the legates is Philip the Presbyter. And here's what it says in the third session. So again, this is from the Acts of the Council of Ephesus, third session. It says this: Philip the Presbyter and legate of the Apostolic See said, there is no doubt, and in fact it has been known in all ages. So he's talking about something that is well known to everybody present at the council, that the holy and most blessed Peter, so notice we're talking about the Apostle Peter, prince and head of the apostles. So already we have something here. Right? Anybody who wants to say that there wasn't a primacy in the Apostolic College is already out of step with the Council of Ephesus. Immediately out of step. Okay, there clearly was a primacy here of Peter among the Apostolic College. And that's being testified to here in the Council of Ephesus. And Philip the Legate is taking it for granted that everybody there already knows this. And of course, the Council Fathers are accepting this. They're not protesting it. Most blessed Peter, prince and head of the apostles, pillar of the faith. Very interesting term there, pillar of the faith, right? Pillars uphold truth. And foundation of the Catholic Church. Foundation, of course, harkens back to rock, right? Receive the keys from our Lord Jesus Christ. Clearly appealing to Matthew 16. All right, so he's thinking here of what's going on in Matthew 16 with Peter being singled out there. The Savior and Redeemer of the human race, and that to him was given the power of loosing and binding sins. Obviously, Matthew 16 is being thought of here. Keys, bonding and loosing, clearly. Who down even to today. So now notice we have a shift, right? We're not just talking about Peter and his primacy among the Apostolic College and his role and his prerogatives there. We're now talking about successors who down even to this day and forever both lives and judges in his successors. So what's being said here is that Peter is working, if you will, through his successors. Okay. Now, of course, we could say that every bishop, right, is a Peter in their diocese. We could say Peter is working in every bishop. In one sense, sure, we could say that. But there's a unique claim that Rome makes here, a unique sense in which it is the successor of St. Peter. And notice what he says here. He doesn't say, well, what I'm focusing on here is the Petrine succession of every bishop. No. He's talking specifically now about the Pope, because he goes on to say, the holy and most blessed Pope Celestine, according to due order, is his successor. Okay, so he's noting especially Celestine is the successor of the Apostle Peter and holds his place. And us he sent to supply his place in this Holy Synod, the legate, which the most humane and Christian emperors have commanded to assemble, bearing in mind and continually watching over the Catholic faith. For they both have kept and are now keeping intact the apostolic doctrine handed down to them from their most pious and humane grandfathers and fathers of holy memory down to the present. And there's more things that Philip says here in the Acts that is interesting, but this is definitely worth noting because the point is, we see certain things being given to Peter in Matthew 16. And now we're saying that that is something that endures beyond just Peter. Now in his successors, that's important. This being head of the apostles, that now applies to the head of the College of Bishops, right? As Peter is head of the Apostolic College, his successor, the Pope, is now head of the College of Bishops. Foundation, pillar of faith, that's going to also pass on to the successor. Receiving the keys of the kingdom, that's passing on to the successor. The power of binding and loosing, passing on to the successor. Now, of course, we could talk about the other bishops in another qualified sense, having the keys and having the authority to bind and loose, but the Bishop of Rome has a unique claim to that. And again, lives and judges in his successor. Very, very interesting point here by Philip that is not being contested. There was another one. I want to say it's in session 2. Let's see. Yeah. Philip, presbyter and legate of the Apostolic See, said, "We offer thanks to the Holy and Venerable Synod that when the writings of our holy and blessed Pope had been read to you, the holy members, by our holy voices, you joined yourselves to the holy head, as also by your holy acclamation." So here we see that there is a relationship between the Pope and the bishops assembled in a council, one of head and members. And the head really isn't to operate outside, talking about in a council, apart from the bishops. We can talk about the Pope considered in and of himself. We can do that outside of a council. But when we're speaking about a council, we need to consider not the Pope as just kind of his own thing and then the bishops. No, what we need to consider is the bishops as one thing, the Pope being the head, and the other bishops being the members. Kind of a one organic body. For your blessedness is not ignorant that the head of the whole faith, the head of the apostles, is blessed Peter the apostle. But again, we already just saw there in the third session, those prerogatives are being passed on to the successor. So as Peter is the head of the Apostolic College, now you have the Pope being the head of the College of Bishops. And since now our mediocrity, after having been tempest tossed and much vexed, has arrived, we ask that you give order that there would be laid before us what things were done in this Holy Synod before our arrival, in order that according to the opinion of our blessed Pope and of this present Holy Assembly, we likewise may ratify their determination. Okay, some important concepts there to glean from Philip. Now, let's look a little bit later at Leo. Now, what's going on here is that Leo is writing to, let's see, did I pull it up right? Let's check. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Just making sure I had the right letter pulled up. I've been rereading Leo's letters recently. And this was an interesting one. So you have a lot going on here, right? You have an archimandrite by the name of Eutyches. And, of course, an archimandrite is the head of a monastery. So he's a priest. He's the head of a monastery. And Eutyches is responding to Nestorius, who is already condemned at the Council of Ephesus that we just saw. And so what he's trying to do is he's trying to refute a heretic, but in his own writings, and there, from his perspective, him writing to the Pope, he's saying, no, I'm not teaching any kind of heresy. But then what happens is there was a synod called in Constantinople by the Patriarch of Constantinople, Flavian, and they were judging whether or not Eutyches is a heretic, and some things were said there. Now, Eutyches kind of gives a different side of the story, but there were some things that were said there by him that were heretical. And that information was then passed. Flavian sent that information over to the Pope. The Pope wasn't actually happy with the information he was sent over. He wanted some more, so Flavian sent over more information. And at that point, it was clear to Pope Leo that he was a heretic, because Eutyches was he was appealing to the Pope, basically saying they misjudged me at the synod. I'm not a heretic. And so the Pope is just thinking, okay, well, what's going on? Well, I need more information, and he's getting information now from Flavian. So he's getting the other side of the story, and he's saying, okay, this guy is teaching heresy. And maybe it'll be fun to examine, his particular heresy another time, but that's not necessarily material to what we're going to be looking at right now with the papal claims. The point is, the emperor wanted to call a council to respond to this issue. And Pope Leo kind of felt like this isn't even needed. He even writes to the emperor and says effectively that I've already condemned this guy. I've already condemned Eutyches, and there's really no need for a council. But, for a fuller judgment, for the sake of a fuller judgment, you can have a council, So he basically accommodates the Pope. The emperor, and says, okay, fine, it's not needed, but you want to have a council for a more fuller judgment, great. And so what the Pope does is he now writes to this council. It's called the Second Ephesus. It's called, it was called in 449. So this is Ephesus 2. This is what we often know as the Robber Synod, which is, of course, condemned shortly thereafter, 2 years later, at the Council of Chalcedon, in the council itself, although Leo had already called it a robber council prior to that, right? So, that's just kind of the backstory to what's going on here. So he's writing to Ephesus 2, which later on turns out to not be a very good council that gets overturned by Chalcedon. There was a lot of chaos going on here. Some of the stuff that the Pope was sending over that was to be read at the council, they were refusing to read. So a lot going on. All right, but here's what the Pope says to them, okay, to an assembled ecumenical council at the time. Leo, bishop to the Holy Synod, which is assembled at Ephesus, the devout faith of our most clement prince, knowing that it is especially concerns his glory to prevent any seed of error from springing up within the Catholic Church, has paid deference to the divine institutions. Wait. He's saying the emperor has paid deference to divine institutions. Wait, what divine institutions are we talking about? Okay, but we're going to find out in a second. But notice what we're about to talk about is a divine institution. It's not just something that came by conciliar decrees. It's not just something that came about because of there were a lot of martyrs here, or this was the seat of the empire. What we're about to read is something that is a divine institution. And something that is a divine institution doesn't just shift and change with culture. It's something divinely established, right? As to apply to the authority of the apostolic see for a proper settlement. So he was applying to the apostolic see, that is Rome, for a settlement of the controversy, as if he wished it to be declared by the most blessed Peter himself, which, again, makes sense in light of what we saw there at Ephesus, right? I mean, you have Pope Celestine being, well, let me rephrase, you have Peter working through, if you will, Pope Celestine, right? So it is clear that Peter, as he works through his successors, as Philip says, that's applicable here with Leo, right? Declared by the most blessed Peter himself. So whenever he's, the emperor is consulting Leo, it's as if he's consulting Peter, because Peter is working through his successors, is what's being implied. Himself was praised in his confession when the Lord said, Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And the disciples mentioned various people's opinions, but when he asked what they themselves believed, the chief of the apostles, again, notice that there is a primacy of Peter among the apostles, embracing the fullness of the faith, in one short sentence said, You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That is, you who truly is Son of Man is also truly Son of the living God. I say true in Godhead, true in flesh, and one altogether, the properties of the two natures being kept intact, right? And so there's some really good Christology going on here, although he had already given his tome, right? The tome had already been written, and if you have not read the Tome of Leo, by the way, read it immediately. It's not very long. I mean, you read it in 15 minutes. It's very short, but it's extremely good when it comes to the Christology, and it's making a lot of good distinctions. How should we view Christ? How should we view his human nature, his divine nature? Do they mix? Are they separated? He's answering these questions. How do we properly perceive them and understand them? So that's what he's talking about there, because he's responding to Eutyches. And if Eutyches had believed this intelligently and thoroughly, he would have never have retreated from the path of this faith. For Peter received this answer from the Lord for his confession, Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed it to you, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say unto you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Interesting, because we were talking about divine institutions, weren't we? And then we all of a sudden start talking about the apostolic see as a divine institution. And why are we talking about the apostolic see? Because it's based on Peter. Okay, well, what's going on with Peter? We're now on to Matthew 16. So, I mean, it's very clear what's going on in Matthew 16 is the Lord is setting up an institution. The Lord himself. That is why we speak of the papacy as a divine institution. This is being testified to by the Pope writing to the robber council, although at the time, everybody believed that this was an authentic ecumenical council. But he who both rejects the blessed Peter's confession and gainsays Christ's gospel is far removed from union with this building, for he shows himself never to have had any zeal for understanding the truth, and to have only the empty appearance of high esteem, who did not adore the hoary hairs of old age with any ripe judgment of the heart. Okay. Big point, though. Right there. Papacy is being referenced as a divine institution. Now, we could talk about how does this work, right? I mean, but we still at least need to start with just the very basics, the very foundation, that there are successors to the Apostle Peter, as we saw previously, and that is in the Bishop of Rome, and that it's of a divine institution. Now, on to the Sixth Ecumenical Council. And let me see where we are. Okay. It's kind of in the middle here. I had it highlighted earlier. Moved on me. Let me find it. and then I'll set the stage as well. Okay. No, that's not it. Okay. I'm looking, y'all. Well, I'll find it here in a second, but is this it right here? I hate when things move on me. You should read the whole thing, by the way. It's a little long, though. I think it's right around here. Okay. Well, no, that's not it. Well, give me a second, y'all. I will find it. Let me first set the stage before I do so. But he has a whole lot to say in this. And like I said, you need to read the whole thing. It's pretty long. It's the letter of Pope Agatho. Again, this is the Sixth Ecumenical Council. And what they're dealing with is the controversy on monothelitism, right? Does Jesus have two wills or one will? How does that work? That's effectively what's going on here. Lot of stuff that was going on prior to the council too. A whole lot of drama. And of course, it really came out of some issues of accepting the Fifth Council. And the Fifth Council was called because there were some problems with some accepting the Fourth Council. The Fourth Council was called because there were some problems accepting the Third Council. Third Council was called because there were some problems accepting the, that's kind of how it tends to go, right? So a whole lot that could be said leading up to this controversy, but an ecumenical council is called to deal with the issue of whether or not there is one will in Christ or two. And it was a major issue because some people were being exiled for maintaining particular views. Some were being persecuted. And it has a lot of impact on your Christology, and it does lead to problems with soteriology. If your Christology isn't right, it's going to impact your soteriology. So, some people are wondering, okay, why does it even matter whether or not Jesus has one will or two will? And why does it matter whether it's two natures, if we even want to recognize two natures are mixed together or separated? And why do these things matter, is what the average person is going to think. Well, they have an impact on whether or not God has actually redeemed us. Because there's a very early principle that was made, even a little bit before some of these councils, but it's especially being noted right after Nicaea 1. And the principle is that which is not assumed is not redeemed. And what effectively is being said is that Jesus came to heal our nature and to also elevate it, to bring it to the divine, so we have union with the divine. But if he's not healing our nature, if he's not taking on our nature, he's not healing it, right? So he has to take on our nature in order to heal it. And if there's a part of us, if you will, humanity, a part of our humanity that he didn't take on, maybe our will, or human flesh, right? If there's something that is part of human nature that he doesn't take on, it has not been healed by the divine. It's been untouched. It's still tainted by sin. But in the incarnation, there is healing. That's why we see, salvation isn't just something that happens on the cross, although that's very important for salvation. But salvation really begins at the incarnation. A whole lot of healing to the human race is happening there. Because now you have God touching humanity, the divine touching human nature. And in doing so, he heals it, he purifies it, he cleanses it, he restores it, and then even elevates it to even more than it was prior to the fall. So that's why this matters. That's why it matters. Does he have a human will? Does he not? Is his will only divine? If he doesn't have a human will, then our will has not been redeemed. That is going to lead you to some serious problems, right? Major problems. Because it means our will then has not been healed by God and is still corrupt, is still tainted. It hasn't been restored by the divine. Not that we don't, as individuals, still struggle with our will, but the point is, potentially speaking, it has been my will as an individual, Michael Lofton, has been restored, right? It has been healed. It has been cleansed. The very least, that potency is there. I might not activate it necessarily, right? That's the point. So it's very important, in fact, what's being dealt with at the council. This isn't just these bishops. They're just scrupling over the dumbest things in theology. Who cares? Get to more important things. Why can't we just go and deal with this and that? Y'all are over here fighting over how many natures and wills does Jesus have? Because it impacts the entire rest of your soteriology. This is, in fact, why the early councils dealt more with Christology than they did more soteriological issues, although they're related, right? They're clearly related. But this is why you would say, especially if you're coming from a Reformed perspective, why are they talking so much about Christology? Why don't they talk more about the atonement? Although they do some. But why don't they talk more about what happened on the cross and the atonement and justification and things like that? Though they do talk about those things, it's more from a Christological perspective. Why? Because ultimately those things are built on two foundational areas, and that is the Trinity and Christology. So Trinity and incarnation. Those are your two main areas of theology. Those are the two main areas. If you think soteriology is the main area, or eschatology and focusing on focusing on the end times, and that's the most important thing, you're missing it. You're missing it. The two most important areas in theology, if we're going to systematize our theology, it's going to be, of course, God proper, theology proper. So God, the one God, and then also God considered as three, the Trinity, and then the incarnation, Christology. And based on those things, that's going to then determine everything else. Everything else. That's why we have terms like hierarchy of truths. We speak about there are some things that are more, that are higher in the hierarchy of truths. Not that something might be more authoritatively taught or more dogmatic than something else. Because, for example, the notion that Jesus is one with the Father, consubstantial with the Father, is dogmatic, but so are indulgences. But there's a world of difference between the importance of those two teachings, right? We would have to say Jesus being consubstantial with the Father is way up here as far as priority, and indulgences way down there, yet both are dogmatic. The reason why is because of the hierarchy of truth, because there's so many other doctrines that are centered around Jesus being consubstantial with the Father than there are doctrines that are centered around indulgences. So that's why you have such a focus here in the early councils on Trinity issues and Christology, and not stuff like indulgences or even the Assumption of Mary or the Immaculate Conception. Not saying those aren't important, and clearly they impacted Ephesus, right, with Theotokos. So you do have some Marian aspects there, but those are peripheral to Christology. the big issue there at Ephesus isn't so much Mary, although clearly it's important. The bigger issue was if you're denying her the title Theotokos, you're actually getting into a Christological heresy. So the bigger emphasis is your Christology. So again, some of y'all might be wondering, why does this even matter? Like, why do y'all even have councils about this kind of stuff? That's why we're having these councils. All right, let me find the section real quick here because it moved on me. Let's see. Take me a moment to find it. Okay. Yeah, it moved on me. If I can't find it quickly, I'm going to just have to come back and do Agatho at a later time. Some other good things in Agatho that I'm seeing coming up too. The divine essence and energies distinction. Some say it's implied there in what Agatho is saying. I think that would be fun to do a whole video on it. I remember Dr. Goff has a lecture where he talks about that too. Well, might have to come back to that one because I would just say let's just read the whole letter, but it's extremely long, so we're not going to do that. But I mean, what he does do is he ties in, he connects, of course, the papacy to the claims of Peter, and it also speaks of its indefectibility, it being unblemished. If I can't find it, though, we'll touch on it another time. Yeah. I think that's what we'll do. So like I said, I had it pulled up, but then it moves on me. I think whenever I zoomed out is when that happened. Actually, I zoomed in so that I can make it bigger on the screen. And it moved where I was. I had found it right before I went live. Tell you what, though. Give me a minute and I get it from my other computer. So let me go to a quick commercial break and I'll grab it. 1 second, y'all. Hey everybody, Michael with Reason and Theology here. Just wanted to remind you to go to reasonandtheology.com and click on St. Maximus the Confessor Institute, where you will find all kinds of lectures available to you from different contributors such as Dr. Matthew Miner, Dr. Joy, myself, and upcoming lectures by William Albrecht and others. And most of these lectures right now are free. All you need to do is just simply click on one of the series that you would like and then go to log in to enroll, and then you'll simply click on register an account by putting in your email information and a password, and it will have you enrolled for the class, and you can then watch the videos for free. Let us know if you have any questions. Email us at reasonandtheology.com if you do. All right, so here's a couple of them. I won't be able to pull it up on the screen because I have it on my other computer. Here's what he says. The true confession thereof for Peter was pronounced blessed by the Lord of all things, was revealed by the Father of heaven, for he received from the Redeemer of all himself by 3 commendations the duty of feeding the spiritual sheep of the church, under whose protecting shield the apostolic church of his has never turned from the path of truth in any direction of error, whose authority as that of the Prince of the Apostles, the whole Catholic Church, and the ecumenical synods has faithfully embraced, and following in all things, and all the venerable fathers have embraced its apostolic doctrine. That's effectively the part that I was thinking of. Let me see if I can find it here now that we got it pulled up. Okay. Yeah, here we go. Now I can bring it up on my screen. Sorry about that. Like I said, things move on you. Let me get to beginning point here. Therefore, I beseech you with contrite heart and rivers of tears, with prostrated mind, deign to stretch forth your most clement right hand to the apostolic doctrine, which the co-worker of your pious labors, the blessed apostle Peter, has delivered, that it not be hidden under a bushel, but that it be preached in the whole earth more shrilly than a bugle, because the true confession thereof, and again, this is a pope writing to the emperor, being read at an ecumenical council. In fact, let's see. Letter to Agatho. Says, because the true confession thereof, for which Peter was pronounced blessed by the Lord of all things, of course he's referring to Matthew 16, was revealed by the Father of heaven, for he received from the Redeemer of all himself by 3 commendations the duty of feeding spiritual sheep of the church. So that's important, because here's your Luke passage. It's not just, when we talk about the papal claims, it's not just Matthew 16 that we're referring to, right? The Luke passage is another one. Feed my sheep, feed the flock. That's another one. And here you have a pope before an ecumenical, he's really writing to the emperor, to my recollection, and it's being read at an ecumenical council. Here you have him testifying to this Luke passage as applicable to the papacy, under whose protecting shield this apostolic church, that is Rome, of his, has never turned away from the path of truth. So up until that time, Rome has never turned away from the path of truth. And here, this is at the very council where they're discussing Honorius, right? Interesting. And there's ways to square that one. Reconcile that one. In any direction of error, whose authority as that of the Prince of the Apostles. So notice again, the authority of the Pope is really being compared to the authority of Peter, and is deriving from this authority. This is why we speak of it as a divine institution, because what's going on there with Peter was instituted by Christ himself in Matthew 16, and now it is being exercised in his successors, as the legate says. As that of the Prince of the Apostles, the whole Catholic Church and the ecumenical synods have faithfully embraced. So now he's even noting that the ecumenical synods have accepted this and followed in all things, and all the venerable fathers have embraced its apostolic doctrine, through which they, as the most approved luminaries of the Church of Christ, have shown, and the holy Orthodox doctors have venerated it and followed it, while the heretics have pursued it, and with false criminations and with derogatory hatred. Now, I think there's another passage, too, that I wanted to get to from Agatho. Let's see. Yeah, let me find this one. Okay, yeah, now this one is going to be the synodal letter of the Sixth Council to Pope Agatho, which is a little bit later on after this, but it'd be easier for me to just do a keyword search. Let me find it. Holy and Universal. Well, the one that I have says this. Let's see. Okay. No, that's not it. Might just have to read it from the one on my other screen here. I'd like to pull it up for y'all, though. I really want to get it pulled up. Let's see. I know it's towards the bottom. It's going to be in this letter here, the letter of the council to Saint Agatho. Okay. Well, the relevant portion is this part. Again, this is a letter by the council to Agatho, to the Pope, because he's not present. And so to you, as the bishop of the first see of the universal church, which in and of itself isn't necessarily something that's going to be given pushback by everybody. At least, I mean, it would by the Protestants, right? But like even Orthodox can affirm, okay, yeah, at the time they're the first see. Sure, just what does it mean to be the first see is the question. Well, as we saw, part of being the first see was due to something that was a divine institution. That's the problem. It's not just that Rome is the first see among the other sees because of the place of the empire and stuff like that. It's also because of something that was divinely instituted. So now the question is, can that be transferred to another see? That's going to be the problem. I would say no, it's not transferable, because you do have things that note that the see won't fail. Its indefectibility, it being unblemished, and that it can't err, that it can't fall into, grave error. So that would imply an indefectibility, and I would even then suggest an intransferability, that it couldn't be transferred to another see. Because that's going to be some of the claims that some of the later Orthodox make. You'll find some Orthodox who would say, yeah, sure, we'll accept the Pope as the first, and the only problem is let his confession be true first, right? Let him not be a heretic first. If he's preaching the right faith and teaching the right things and not teaching heresy as he currently does, according to the Orthodox, then yes, we will accept him as first. So there's almost this idea of a transferability of the see, of being the first, that it could be transferred to another, like Constantinople. And this idea of the transferability of something that's divinely instituted is the problem. And I would say is definitely not there in the first millennium. I'll try to give it one more shot. Okay. Try to give it one more shot to pull it up on my screen. And yeah, here it is. Yeah, okay. I believe I've found it here on my other one. Let me read it from here. Let me start here. Sorry, patrons. Should have had this a little bit more accessible. Serious illness call for greater helps, as you know, most blessed Father, and therefore Christ our true God, who is the creator and governing power of all things, gave a wise physician, namely your God-honored sanctity, to drive away by force the contagion of heretical pestilence by the remedies of orthodoxy, and to give the strength of health to the members of the church. Therefore, to you, as the bishop of the first see of the universal church, talking about the Pope, and notice again the concept of a universal church, because some, not all, some have a problem with that concept, and they only want to see ecclesiology as local. And though there is a lot to be said about the universal church fully being in the local church, we still need to be able to talk about a church, a universal church, above the local level. Even though that might sound confusing, we still need to be able to speak about it, because otherwise, how are you distinguishing your church, your local church, from a schismatic church, or from, maybe the Eastern Orthodox versus the Oriental Orthodox? Unless you're going to have to go the route that they no longer have valid sacraments once they've left the communion of Orthodox churches. So some take that route. We leave what must be done, since you willingly take for your standing ground the firm rock of the faith, as we know from having read your true confession in the letter sent by your fatherly beatitude to the most pious emperor. We acknowledge that this letter was divinely written, interesting, as by the chief of the apostles. So they're seeing Peter working through Agatho. Again, we could speak about that with every bishop, right? But I don't know if this kind of language can be spoke about every bishop. And through it we have cast out the heretical sect of many errors, which had been recently sprung, having been urged to make a decree by Constantine, who divinely reigns. And a lot could be said here about the emperor and his relation to, of course, God, and wields a most clement scepter. And they go to talk about the overthrowing of heretics and so on and so forth. But I did think that was interesting, because we here see an admission that he's the first see of the universal church, which in and of itself isn't going to necessarily differentiate one's claims from the Orthodox, because they could speak about the papacy in that sense, but not in light of what we had previously read, it being a divine institution. That's why it's the first see. That's where they're going to have to say, no, we don't agree. And they're going to have to then read Leo and read Ephesus, Philip, the legates, and others in a different way. And leads to all kinds of other issues in ecclesiology, which I think we see being played out today among the Orthodox, because they still don't have a settled view on primacy, and that is one of the very things they're fighting over in the schism between the Greeks and Moscow. So anyways, patrons, appreciate y'all hanging in with me there while I get the quote as it moved on me. And sorry I didn't have it a little bit more readily available, but I hope it was helpful. I intend to do some more if y'all would like. Just let me know. And like I said, this is going to be available just for the patrons, but I shot it live, especially so I can maybe get a little bit of participation at the end here. If y'all have any questions, go ahead and send it now. I'll take some for just a few minutes at reasonandtheology.com if you can, please. Somebody was asking, is that Leo or Agatho? Just a few minutes ago, we were discussing at the time was Agatho. We had done Leo earlier. His 33rd letter to Ephesus 2 is what we were looking at, which is interesting, because then you have Flavian at the end of it, the Patriarch of Constantinople, Flavian, appealing over what they considered to be an ecumenical council at the time, appealing its decision to the Pope. Very interesting, because at least in Flavian's mind, an ecumenical council could be there could be something something higher, if you will, than an ecumenical council, namely the Pope, that you could appeal to over an ecumenical council's decisions. And I would also say it's kind of implied there in Leo, who's telling the emperor this isn't even necessary to even have an ecumenical council. A judgment has already been made by the Apostolic See. In his mind, he kind of sees himself higher than an ecumenical council. You definitely see it with Vigilius, right? As Robert Price notes in his book on the Fifth Ecumenical Council and its acts, the acts of the Fifth Ecumenical Council. You see him explicitly saying over and over and over, Vigilius did think that he was over an ecumenical council, for sure. Now, maybe Vigilius is wrong, right? But he definitely saw himself as over an ecumenical council. And very interesting, because then you have the Fifth Council suspending, at least it considers to have suspended him, right? And then there's questions on whether or not that was necessarily confirmed by the Apostolic See, and a whole lot that could be said there. But it's interesting in the very council that you see suspending a pope, which is a little different than the theory that I would advocate, where I would talk about maybe the deposing of a pope. But here you have the suspending of a pope, in the very council where this is happening, the Pope who's being suspended sees himself as above an ecumenical council. It's just interesting that you see already this tension very early on, and in fact, it predates the Fifth Council. But another thing that we just noted there with Agatho is here at the Sixth Council, where you have a pope being condemned, Honorius, right? You have Agatho making these claims about how the apostolic see is unblemished and has not erred from the faith, and so that's interesting too. A lot of people want to try to point out, the case of the Fifth Council or the Sixth Council and think it's a death blow. But then in those very councils, you have the other side of the story. You have the Pope saying himself over the council, or you see the Pope saying, yeah, Honorius is a heretic, and yet the apostolic see has never erred. Although also I should say one last point about the Fifth Council. Maybe we'll do a whole video on it. That should be fun. I should say one other thing about the Fifth Council. Though it did suspend the Roman pontiff, or at least it claimed to, it did make it clear that they are not severing communion with the see of Rome. They're still preserving communion with the apostolic see, but they're suspending Vigilius. Very, very interesting. They still saw it essential, or I should at least say important, to preserve communion with the apostolic see. So anyways, hope that was helpful. Let's see if I can find any evidence of papal primacy at the First Council of Nicaea. Yeah. Direct evidence, something that would be explicit. No, not necessarily. Now, you do have, of course, a canon there about Rome that is often debated at Nicaea 1 that some think that actually detracts or takes away from its primacy. But of course, it's not speaking about the universal jurisdiction of the papacy. It's more talking about its jurisdiction as basically an archbishop or a metropolitan. It's because the way the canon is phrased, it almost seems to limit his jurisdiction. So the question is, how does he have universal jurisdiction? Because it's not speaking about him at the Pope considered as a universal pastor. It's the Pope considered as something lower than that, as an archbishop, as a metropolitan, if you will. Because, of course, the Pope is, first of all, a bishop of a local diocese. Then he's also a patriarch of a particular territory. Then he's the universal bishop. So just we have to properly make distinctions and determine what are we considering the Pope as, right? So, I mean, I can't think of anything that would be directly in favor of papal primacy there at Nicaea 1, but there is that issue that some would think takes away from it, although I don't believe it does. But I don't know if I'm wrong there. If there is something that's a little bit more explicit there at Nicaea 1, please let me know, but not to my knowledge. Part of the problem is we don't even know if Nicaea 1 had acts. We don't know. Maybe they did have minutes. Maybe they didn't. We sure don't have them preserved, which it's interesting that Price uses that and a few other arguments to refute the idea of conciliar fundamentalism, that everything a council says is 100% infallible, even its non-canons, right? Things that aren't part of the canons or anathemas. Obiter dicta is what it's called. Because you didn't even have acts until Ephesus. Ephesus is the first one that we know of to have acts. But so I imagine if we maybe had the acts, we would have found out a little bit more there. But to my knowledge, nothing explicit. But correct me if I'm wrong. What do I consider to be the strongest argument against the papacy? The strongest argument against the papacy is practical arguments. And it would go something like this, and it's something I've often made myself. The papacy might make sense on paper and in history, and you have councils that seem to be testifying to the Catholic understanding, and all that makes sense on paper, but in reality, what do we have? In reality, we have Pope Francis. So, we can talk in theory all day long and objectively all day long, but at the end of the day, you have Pope Francis. So those would be the strongest arguments, is practically pointing these things out, and then asking, how could this really be the very same one that we read about described in Leo? Leo's describing the papacy, and it just doesn't necessarily sound like it's very reflective of Pope Francis, right? Or Agatho is talking about the see being unblemished. It's very hard to speak about Francis's see being unblemished, stuff like that. So they're practical arguments. Why aren't they good? Because they're just that. They're relative. They're subjective. They're not necessarily getting at objective truth. And there, of course, are ways to address, okay, well, how do we consider the current papacy in light of what we've seen and reconcile the two? There's plenty of ways to do that. But I think that's the strongest argument, is just a practical argument, right? But hey, if you think there's something better, great. Lateran Council 649 needs more attention. Absolutely, because that's definitely going to be in favor of the papacy. There in 649, you already have a lot of claims being made there. Very interesting. Talk about Clement. Yeah. A lot could be said here, of course, about Clement, but first of all, I mean, whether or not Clement actually wrote First Clement is going to be up to debate, although I think he did. But there's going to be a debate there. Is he writing as the Bishop of Rome at the time or just secretary? There's a debate there, right? But I mean, I believe the traditional views here. I'm just throwing out that there's going to be people who are going to toss that out as a counter argument. But of course, Clement, what he has going on is he's intervening in the affairs of Corinth. But others will rightly note that, wait, Corinth wrote to the Pope at the time. So it's not like he just went out and did this on his own initiative. They were seeking his counsel. To my recollection, I thought that somebody in Corinth at that time had appealed to him, had written to him, but I could be wrong, since it's been a very long time since I've looked at the case of Pope Victor or Clement, or some of the passages in Irenaeus that speak of concord in relation to Rome. It's been a while since I've looked at them, but from what I recall, it wasn't a very strong argument, although you'll hear it mentioned a lot in popular apologetic circles. I haven't found it to be a very, very strong case, although it does still lend itself to the papacy. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying it's not like some kind of silver bullet. And even then, if nobody had appealed to him in Corinth, let's just say that nobody appealed to him. Okay, I mean, but I could still imagine a diocese writing to another diocese correcting some abuses that are going on, right? I could still imagine that taking place. I could still see one bishop rebuking other people in another area. And then, of course, all an Orthodox has to do is just say, yeah, look, but he's intervening in the affairs just simply as the bishop of a territory that is well known for some martyrs at this point. Not as many as later on, but still they've had a few martyrs at that point, is well known for the bodies of Peter and Paul and its place in the empire. So it would be fitting for Clement to reach out to this congregation and tell them to get their act in line. So one could say that, right? So it's not a silver bullet in favor of the papacy, but it does lend itself to the papacy and its arguments. Okay. Well, let's see. What is this? Why does Jesus need to take human nature to heal it? He doesn't need to. He doesn't have to. It's just fitting. God could have healed us like that. God could heal us by putting on some rollerblades and skating down the highway. I mean, God could heal. God could do anything he wants by any means that's not contrary to his nature, right? I mean, so there's nothing absolutely necessary that he actually has, so as if there's some kind of constriction on how he's going to heal us, that it has to be by him becoming incarnate, as if there's something, there's some standard that God has to live up by. No, God could have healed us in another way, but it's most fitting, right? Is it something like, in order to heal something, we must see its perfected form? Is our telos? Am I on track there? I mean, there's definitely something to that, right? There's definitely something to that, but I would definitely put the priority or focus on the fact that it's most fitting. It's most fitting that he would become one of us. What was Philip's letter? Kyle is asking. It wasn't necessarily a letter. I mean, it was him at the second and third acts, or the second or third session, I should say, at the Council of Ephesus. Philip the legate, who is present there, speaks. So it wasn't necessarily a letter. Fifth council could not suspend Pope validly because you don't have a council without the Pope. Well, you're going to find all kinds of problems with that one. Good luck as a Catholic maintaining that one. Of course, are you going to now say that, I mean, think about it. Does that apply to the Second Ecumenical Council? Were any representatives of Rome present at 381? How's that work? I'm just saying. I mean, you see, this isn't going to work. And we can poke a lot more holes in it than just that. So that's not going to work. So that might seem like a good argument. It's not going to be able. You're not going to be able to consistently apply it elsewhere. So I would say no. There would need to be some other counter arguments to it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The claim of Irenaeus that Christ is 50 years old. I'm so glad you reminded me of that. I want to do a whole show on that. Let's do a show on it. I'm glad you reminded me, because I think that's a good one, because you'll have people say, well, you can't really appeal to apostolic tradition because Irenaeus thinks that this is an apostolic tradition, right? But I'll just say one thing. Just because somebody thinks something is an apostolic tradition in and of itself doesn't mean it's an apostolic tradition. So just because Irenaeus said it's apostolic doesn't in and of itself make it. The reason why we say that in other areas like apostolic succession, the reason why we affirm what he's saying there and we do see it as an apostolic tradition is because it's been corroborated by plenty of others, right? It's not just Irenaeus alone saying it. It's being corroborated by individuals elsewhere saying the same thing. Whereas this issue has not been corroborated by any other fathers to my knowledge. So that's the quick answer for you there. Anything else that we could find? Yeah, Hank Sancta. That's definitely a fun one to go over. Although we've done a little bit. Okay, well, I think that's it. Not seeing anything else. So, we'll, let's see. Okay, so Alan Rule is saying, I disagree with that reading. Vigilius wasn't deposed in session 7. Well, I said suspended, not deposed, but yeah. It didn't become ecumenical until later, right? That's the argument of some. The point is, however, the big thrust is not when you determine it's ecumenical. The big thrust here is that they thought that they could. Some bishops in the East at this time thought that they could suspend a pope. That's the point. Which just goes to show that, yes, some in the East did not understand papal primacy in the way that we do. That's all. That's all it means. It doesn't mean that this was somehow, a good act and is an authentic act of an ecumenical council, though we would still need to talk about session 7 and whether or not it was ratified. But yeah, the argument isn't, at least I'm not accepting the criticism against Rome here as, well, an ecumenical council thought it, actually had the authority to suspend a pope. That's not my claim. And that's not where I see the strength in the criticism. The strength in the criticism that I'm seeing is that some bishops at that time assembled in a council thought that they could suspend a pope. That's all. That's all. That's all I'm saying. Which just goes to show that some did not have the same ecclesiology that we do as Catholics. And yet, the very same Pope at the time did have our ecclesiology insofar as he saw himself as over an ecumenical council. So you'll find others who do have our ecclesiology. So this is why I always say in the first millennium, you can find Catholic and Orthodox ecclesiologies. You can find them. Although I think there's some things about Orthodox ecclesiology that's hard to find, but just depending on which Orthodox you're talking to, right? But I would at least say substantially you can see some of the Orthodox ecclesiologies there in the first millennium, but you can see all kinds of deviations and aberrations in the first millennium. You can find people denying that Jesus is consubstantial with the Father in the first millennium. So just because you find something in the first millennium doesn't make it true, right? So now that we have that, we need to ask, okay, which ecclesiology is the true one? I think the one that is being testified to a little bit more consistently is the Catholic one, and that's why I see the Catholic one as winning the day, if you will, in the first millennium. Hope that helps clarify some things, though. No one looks powerful in Constantinople to except the tyrant Justinian. Yeah. Yeah, everybody received some blows there. Nobody really won from Constantinople too. Although again, it's still interesting what you have going on there at the Fifth Council. Yeah, it's definitely interesting that they thought they could suspend a pope, but at the same time, it's definitely interesting that the Pope thought that he was supreme over a council and could just completely bypass them and ignore them. So, anyways, a whole lot more that could be said there. But I hope that was helpful, y'all. How do Orthodox react to Pope Leo rejecting Canon 28? Yeah, different views there, right? Definitely different views. But it's interesting that the reason why he's rejecting Canon 28, that is Leo, is, yeah, I mean, you could speak about it being an infringement. Well, you could speak about it in papacy related terms, but it was more his concern was that it was contrary to Nicaea 1. And he believed that you couldn't change any of those disciplinary canons, such as Nicaea 1's canon of the taxes here. He thinks that you can't change any of its disciplinary canons because he doesn't see it as a disciplinary canon. That's the thing. We would see it as disciplinary, things like that can be modified. He wouldn't see that. So it's just very interesting why he rejected it. And of course, now this does encroach then on the jurisdiction in place in honor of Alexandria. That was a big thing for him, of course, but Nicaea is where it's really located. That you couldn't change the order that's found in a canon of an ecumenical council. All right. Well, again, I hope this was helpful to y'all. Patrons, I hope you enjoy it. And again, thank you for your support. Thank you for all that you do for us. So definitely, I hope y'all enjoy this one. This one is for y'all. All right. Well, everybody take care. God bless. Don't forget to like this video, comment. Let me know your thoughts and questions. Till next time. God bless.